east. Don't be afraid.
We certainly want Richmond to go out and look as well because, as Frank mentioned, certainly Governor McDonnell and Secretary Sean Connaughton have been absolutely supportive. But you go back four governors, and probably more, but four governors, two of which are now senators as well. You've had a long commitment of support that has begun to really accelerate and take off under Governor McDonnell. So they ought to be proud of it and should go out and take a good look at it.
That's good. Let's go to the phone line before we come back here at the auditorium. So let's go to Nick Taborek of Bloomberg. Go ahead, Nick. All right. Go ahead. We hear you. Okay. I tell you what, let's go ahead and take another question here in the auditorium as we start to queue that up right here in the second row, on the right side.
Hi, Doug Money, TMC Satellite Spotlight. Your first door-to-door demo to ISS, you said that'll be a 3 to 5 day mission between launch and rendezvous, correct?
Right.
In the future, are you going to adopt like a 6-hour door-to-door like we have with Progress and Dragon by the time you launch to like a 6-hour-ish rendezvous, faster rendezvous window?
That's a great objective. We're going to walk first, though, and make sure that we can do this right. And once we've done that a few times, and Frank tomorrow and Carl Waltz and their guys prove to me they can do this safely, then we'll start looking at faster opportunities so that we can get there right away.
Okay, let's go ahead and try Irene Klotz from Reuters on the phone, if you can hear us. Go ahead, Irene.
I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
We can. Excellent. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks very much. Hi. I have a few different little housekeeping questions, I think. The first for Frank. Nice to hear your voice. I wanted to know how long Cygnus can stay in orbit, the dummy craft that's flying. I've seen a week to a couple of months. And then also for the operational Cygnus spacecraft, what capability does that have to serve for hosted payloads and other possible commercial missions after separation from the ISS?
Thanks for the question, Irene. It's nice to hear your voice, too. Brings back old memories. Shuttle mirror. But the Cygnus simulator actually can stay in orbit as long as it wants to. We won't have control of it once we separate. It'll probably be up there about 2 weeks, we believe, and then should burn up pretty thoroughly on reentry. It's designed to completely disintegrate. So it should be a safe situation once it has decayed in orbit. And its main purpose is to prove that we can launch a payload-sized object into space. It's got instrumentation on it to characterize the environment, such as acoustics, vibration, accelerations, and it'll give us a good feel for how the separation mechanics work and the separation of the fairing, because it also has cameras on board. The Cygnus spacecraft itself has a lot of capability. It's based on Orbital's legacy of GEO and LEO satellites. That GEO satellites are designed for up to 15 years of life. And we have a lot of those components as a part of the Cygnus spacecraft. A typical mission will be about 30 days, counting the rendezvous, the time on board the station, the time to deorbit. We could extend that to 60 or 90 at NASA's request. However, once we separate from the space station, the spacecraft itself, depending on its fuel load, could probably fly easily for another year. In terms of what the components are certified for. So we think it's a great potential candidate for hosted payloads, and we actually are negotiating for a couple of possibilities over the next few years that might take advantage of that capability to stay on orbit and to transfer data even after it has separated from the station. So it should be a multi-purpose spacecraft. It'll also be useful, we think, going beyond low Earth orbit once the exploration plans take shape and it's determined where humans are going to go next. We certainly would be more than happy to compete for providing the cargo for that base, wherever it happens to be, too, and it's also, as well as for control capability. So it's got a lot of capability.
Okay, I want to go back here to the audience, and then I'll ask James Dean on the phone to just stand by. We'll come to you next. So let's go with Stephen Clark here in the front.
Hi, Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now. A couple of questions. First for Frank. Beyond tomorrow's launch, if it goes well, what is the long pole for the first Cygnus COTS demo to ISS? Is it, sounds like the hardware is close to getting ready. Is it software finding a slot in the ISS manifest? And for Phil or Frank, take us back a couple of years when the decision was made to do this test launch. It wasn't part of the original agreement. The how and why of adding this to the agreement. Thanks.
Okay. I'll go first, Phil.
Yeah, sure.
As far as the schedule going forward, right now we have virtually all the hardware here that we need for the COTS demo mission. There are a couple of components we've held off just because we didn't need to have them here, and we don't need to overcrowd the HIF. But once this flight launches, we'll have the ability to move some pieces around in the horizontal integration facility and start really complete stacking of all of that. The Cygnus spacecraft has been integrated. As I said, it's in the process of being fueled. It'll move over to the HIF later this week, and then we can work towards integrating it. We typically plan on around 2 to 3 months in between missions as a minimum, partly because there are certain pieces of test equipment we need to move from one vehicle to the other in between. We need time to have the pad refurbished and make sure that there's been no damage during a flight. We need time to analyze the data that comes down from a particular flight to ensure there's no modifications we need to make to the software or the hardware. And that works out to around just under 3 months. And so we're looking at late June, early July for the demo mission, and we think that that's certainly doable. And in terms of the history of this flight being added to the program, as both providers were working through the development of their hardware and the development of their ops concepts and getting ready to go to the station, NASA made a determination that they would like to invest in some risk mitigation activities and asked us what we could do, and we said, well, the most logical thing is to add a test flight so that we can demonstrate the entire stack before we actually try to carry cargo to the space station. And so some money was added. We also added some investment on our side to make sure that it worked, and started working towards the test flight as the first mission. We were not initially planning to do a test flight because when we were awarded the COTS demonstration Space Act agreement, we were at $100 million less than the other awardee, and we really couldn't afford it at that time. So adding it, we think, does add some risk mitigation as well as some lessons learned for moving forward towards the demo itself. And Phil, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just elaborate a little bit. Frank, everything Frank said was accurate. Just to give you a little more insight into NASA's thinking, you know, our situation with ISS resupply has evolved over time. It's never one constant thing. As we go year to year, we get more experience with the hardware. We get more experience with how long things take to either break or live. And when we started the COTS program, the end of ISS wasn't exactly clear. We knew we had another provider, so schedule was important to us. And so we felt like we could accomplish the test objectives with just the one flight initially. And then as we got further into the program, we started to realize how critical cargo resupply was going to be. The shuttle lifetime was clearly going to be ending very soon. And I think the importance of the cargo carriers kind of got elevated somewhat within NASA. If you look in the Augustine report, they did a very big scrub of the human spaceflight program. There's a statement in the final report that said maybe NASA should consider additional investment to reduce the risk associated with those flights. There was money put into the President's budget's request of FY11, and then Congress appropriated funds to do just that, was to reduce our risk so that we had a higher confidence level. So what we did was we added content to the Space Act agreements for that purpose, risk mitigation. It's obviously better to have 2 test flights instead of 1. We negotiated with Orbital and concurred with their assessment that the best use of that money was to add an additional test flight, which we will hopefully see tomorrow. And that reduces risk on subsequent flights and makes the overall confidence level of the program a little bit higher. So I think it was money well spent. Orbital also contributed to to that additional mission. And almost all the milestones that we added were associated with this additional test flight, whether it be ground testing or something else. So we thought it was a very prudent expenditure. And we also added a couple shuttle flights towards the end, a couple we weren't sure we were going to get, and that last one took up a lot of cargo, gave us a little bit more flexibility in terms of schedule. So adding this flight didn't turn out to be too